Good evening, Facebook friends and YouTube followers. This is Rich again, back with your third and final video blog of the night for July 18, 2014, around 8 p.m. in Billerica, Massachusetts. One little tidbit before I start my final blog of the night is that the New York Yankees pitcher CC Sabathia is going to have season-ending surgery on his knee, and he's going to be lost for the rest of the year. That's a tough break for the New York Yankees, but CC hopes to be back and ready to pitch in 2015 for the Yankees, and hopefully he could pitch many more productive years because he signed a big contract with the Yankees, and hopefully he could get like 250 to 300 wins, so that could put him in the Hall of Fame, okay? And my third and final video subject of the night is about a classic television game show, Card Sharks. Card Sharks was produced by Marcus and Bill Todman Productions, which was the most famous game show producers of all time, and Card Sharks was based on the card game AC Deucey, which AC Deucey is mean you turn over a card and you have to predict if the next one was higher or lower. This for Card Sharks was like they would do the AC Deucey, but they would have to answer questions on human nature. The most famous version of Card Sharks ran on NBC daytime television from April 24th, 1978 through October 23rd, 1981, hosted by Jim Perry. Jim Perry was a game show host from Canada who hosted the classic game show in Canada, Definition, Headline Hunters, and Fractured Phrases, and he also has hosted the Miss Canada pageant as well. And Jim was actually an American, but he never had a hit show in the United States, so in 1978 he hosted Card Sharks, and this was his first big American television hit. Card Sharks had a best 2 out of 3 game with answering high-low questions on human nature. Some of the questions was a survey. We surveyed 100 men. Do you smoke cigars? Or 100 women. Have you ever been in a bad relationship or not? And one contestant would answer that question first and they give a number, say like 50, and then the next contestant would have to say, is that higher or lower? And if they said it was higher, and if it was higher, they would go to the cards first. If not, they would have the contestant, the first contestant would go to the cards first, and Jim would turn over the card, and it would be a 7, and the contestant had the option of changing that card to a better one, and if they changed it over to a better one, they must have had to play that card, and they would have to say higher or lower, and if it was higher or lower than what they said, they could continue on. But if they miscalled the card, they would have to go back to the original base card at all. But if they continued on and they didn't have like a card, and they had the option of freezing. But if they lost control of the card because of a miscall, then the contestant would have to play their cards, get a free crack at the cards, and they would have to play the card that they are shown first. And they could continue on calling high, low, and if they didn't like a card, they could freeze, but if they miscalled, they'd go back. A maximum of 4 questions were answered on the first 2 rounds, and the 4th question was played for sudden death, where somebody had it and went on the play of the cards, and the contestant who won that had the option of playing the rest of their cards or passing to the challenger, and the same rules applied. If the contestant played their own, he had the right to change the card, and if they passed to the challenger did not have the right to change the card, and that was made some for exciting television. Jim Perry flicked the cards like crazy. He usually said on the second round of the best 2 out of 3, if you remember what's been played before, it would really help. And and the 3rd round, if it was needed, they would have to play a max 3 cards were called, and the maximum of 3 questions. Whoever won 2 out of 3 would go to the money cards, the bonus round, where they could win up to $28,800. They would set up like 3 cards, bet them as they will, and they go to another level. They get $200 more. They bet 3 more cards, and then go to the top level, and they would have to risk last half the money. They could bet as much as they want or all of it, and it could really add up. The maximum amount somebody won on it was $28,800, and they had the right to change the base card on all 3 levels, and it made some for exciting television and the turning of Jim Perry's excitement and enthusiasm of the turn of the card. Some won big, some busted or whatever, but it was a real fun show, and it was a big hit on NBC for the first 2 years. It ran at 10 a.m. for the first 2.5 years, but in June of 1980, Card Sharks moved to the death slot of noontime on NBC, where most NBC stations preempted that for news, or some markets that had to carry the news. Actually, Card Sharks was shown on a secondary channel, like an independent channel, or not seen at all. And usually to like save the ratings and stuff, Card Sharks had a lot of like celebrity themed shows. They had like, I think, 3 weeks in 1980. They had a game show host tournament where they brought like famous game shows to play for charity. Then about in November, they had a 3-week of November of 1980. They had a 3-week tournament for famous celebrities, who most of these celebrities were like game show regulars. And then also they had some kids' weeks during Christmas and other times. These were to try to boost the ratings, but the ratings sagged and stuff. And in October of 1981, NBC axed Card Sharks after 3.5 seasons on the air, which was devastating. But reruns of Card Sharks on the final 2 seasons, like, was shown in syndication beginning in 1982 through 1984, and then it showed on the CBN network in 1984 to 1995. It got very popular. CBS commissioned a new version of Card Sharks hosted by Bob Eubanks, which ran from September 6, 1986 through March 31st of 1989, which was basically the same format of Jim Perry's version of Card Sharks, but they added some little twist in that. Like they had like around, I think, September of that year, they had the contestants who played money cards would get 1 joker, and then they could get up to 3 extra jokers, which they could put on numbers from 1 to 7, and hidden on those cards 1 to 7 was a new card. If they picked the number which they put a card in for the joker, they could win a brand new car. And also they had a polling thing with, like, they had weeks where they had 10 people as a group of polling, and they asked them polling questions, and if they got it right on the nose, they would win $500. And they also had educated guess questions and stuff like that. This version of Card Sharks wasn't as popular and stuff like that. It was hosted by Bob Eubanks. He didn't really have the enthusiasm hosting Card Sharks, and it was just like a little bit slower paced. They actually had a syndicated version of Card Sharks come on the air in September 8, 1986 through September of 1987. It was syndicated, hosted by Bill Raftery, and they had more twists. Like they would have, like, during the main game, they would have prize cards, which contestants who got the prize cards won a fight if they won the match and stuff like that. And usually when they had the prize card, the contestant would recall the card, and always, most of them, they had to recall the card, and they called the card run, and Bill Raftery would always say, "That's a prize drinks." This only lasted 1 year and stuff like that. And also, like, it got off to a good start in syndication, but it went downhill afterwards because of low clearances. I remember there was no television station in Boston that carried Bill Raftery's version of Card Sharks and stuff like that, which was a shame. It was a pretty good show. Afterwards, like, Card Sharks disappeared but it came back on the air in 2001 in a syndicated version hosted by Pat Board, but it was a very different Card Shark game. The main game was like, I think they had a row of 7 cards of contestants would have to call it high or low, and if they didn't like a card, they would have to play a clip chip of like a situation, and they had to guess if it was right or wrong, and it wasn't very good. And the money card was very different than the other ones, but they could have won over $51,000 and stuff like that. Reruns of Card Sharks have been seen on the Game Show Network on and off since 1994. All versions, Jim Perry's version, Bob Eubank's version, and Bill Raftery's version. But you know, they were real popular, the reruns, and they were played over and over and over again. Currently, Card Sharks is not on the air on Game Show Network at all, but it will be back one of these days on Game Show Network because it's popular. I prefer the Jim Perry version the most than the Bob Eubanks version and the Bill Raftery version and the Pat Board version, because Jim Perry's version was more enthusiastic and stuff like that, and it was more fun and excitement, and was a great game show, Card Sharks. And this was, many people didn't even know that Jim Perry was so good as a host. They thought he was a newcomer to the American scene in 1978, even though he hosted game shows in Canada. They thought he was a newcomer, but you know, that's how things were back in the day, and I think Card Sharks ranks right up in maybe the top 10 to 15 game shows of all time. And you know, wish they could have a new version of Card Sharks, like a new updated version of Card Sharks. Maybe it could be on Game Show Network. They revive a version of Card Sharks, but gotta wait and see if that's going to happen. Well, I hope you get to enjoy these blogs. I want to have at least 3 to 6 more tomorrow. Depends what I feel like talking about. I know one subject I'm going to talk about tomorrow is about something that happened 28 years ago tomorrow in the world of professional wrestling. It's the date that Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff turned on WWE Champion Hulk Hogan in a tag team match between Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy on WWE Championship Wrestling. It was one of the most shocking things to date. It was Mr. Wonderful was the first wrestler to turn on Hulk Hogan over, and this led to a long-running feud. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. Good night, Facebook friends and YouTube followers.